Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, your support is crucial, and the best way you can support the podcast is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. Every week or two, we do a group Zoom call with supporters only where we shoot the breeze for an hour or two. I do a weekly write-up and commentary of the news, and sometimes we bring back past podcast guests to do a live Q&A with supporters only. You can donate. That's all over at the website, geopoliticsempire.com. You can purchase a consult if you want to just chat with me about expatriation, geopolitics, or the meaning of life. And do check out all of my affiliates. There's great courses from Escape to Technocracy. You can get gold from Wise Wolf Gold. If you're in the US, get a de-Google phone. If you don't want to de-Google your own phone from Above Phone, they've also got the Above Book. So they're selling laptops now. And check out Sociocultural. It's a friend of mine out in Australia, a fellow Croat who's developed apps for people of Polish, Croatian, and Italian heritage, and using his apps that can help guide you towards naturalization to get a second or third passport. Leave a podcast review if you have not already. And joining us for the first time on the podcast, I spoke to her on TNT Radio, but it's her first time on the podcast, Courtney Turner of the Courtney Turner Podcast. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Courtney.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for making the time. I love the work that you do. We're in a lot of the same circles, and there are probably some listeners around the world that are not quite as familiar with you. So if you just want to, and you're involved in a lot of stuff, you've got your podcast, you've got your Cognitive Liberty conference that you just did. People can still purchase tickets to that, Rebels for a Cause. So tell us a bit, before we get your download on what's happening in the world, if you want to just tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Sure. So yes, I'm Courtney Turner. I'm the host of the Courtney Turner Podcast. And yes, we do conferences as well. I did the Cognitive Liberty Conference back in August. I can't believe it was that long ago. It feels like it was yesterday in some ways, and yet so far away also. But the year before that, we did the Cause Fest, which is the creative artists uniting for the sovereignty of everyone. And that was a Artists for Liberty type event. And we had 53 acts in the span of 2 days. It was 26 and a half hours of content. And that is actually up on the channel as well. People can watch that. I do 2 aerial acrobatic performances. I'm an aerial acrobatic performer. Yeah, what else can I tell you? So I guess for those who are not familiar with my podcast, I started it in 2020. And I always say I was very late to the party. I was looking for the train station. I found the high-speed rail, and I've been scrambling trying to catch up ever since. But that was kind of my big wake-up moment. And for me, I was out in California in Santa Monica, which is crazy, looking at what's going on there. Santa Monica is usually not affected by fires. That's very, very rare. It's right by the water. So typically it is kind of, protected. But unfortunately, it looks like it was really, really hit. But at the time, it was during 2020, and it was a pretty tyrannical measures, and everybody was covering their faces. I'm hearing impaired bilaterally. I actually learned how to speak by reading lips. I didn't get hearing aids until I was almost 6 years old. And I'm also blind in one eye. I had a whole bunch of physical challenges from birth. I had heart surgery when I was about a year old. I was born with fine graphic motor impairment, stunted growth, all sorts of complications. And they told my mom the best she could hope is find a nice institution for me to spend my life. But in 2020, when everybody's face was covered, I didn't realize how much I still depended on nonverbal cues for clarity of speech until all the coping mechanisms I had spent my life developing were then stripped from me. And so I found myself very isolated, very frustrated, really just not in a good place. And somebody had suggested that I needed to be on Rogan, and this doesn't sound funny anymore, but at the time I had no idea what podcasts were. I had never listened to Joe Rogan. I did not know what on earth he was talking about. And I was like, what's a Rogan? Why do I need to be on it? And he explained it, and I started listening, and I found myself listening to the intellectual dark web. I kind of started listening to a lot of podcasts, and then I started getting asked by a bunch of my friends who were not politically aligned, because I would argue with them all the time, if I would go on their show and explain, why I felt so differently from them. And it was, a few months of that, and a few months of doing a lot of reading, because I was, fired from both of my jobs, and all of my speaking engagements and my performances were canceled. So I found myself with a lot more time on my hand, and I didn't have anybody to talk to about all the things I was reading. So, and social media was becoming a very unpleasant place. So that was not the place for me to discuss my ideas. And so I thought maybe, yeah, I should start a podcast. And what really struck me was that regardless of whether I've ever aired them, that at least I could have naked face conversations. And so I just told people that I was going to commit to 6 months of recording and that I might not ever air it, but that I really wanted to have the opportunity to talk to people and see their bare face while I did so. And that hopefully it would be a fruitful experience for both of us. And they really loved it. And so I decided to air a couple of them. And then, other people seemed to find value in it. And so we kept going. And here we are.
And it's great to, listen to your experience and that of others, and listeners to Geopolitics and Empire can learn from this. It's interesting to see how we all started, how you went down the rabbit hole in the 2020s. I started this back in 2012 just because I wanted to be able to talk to experts. I started Skyping them into my university classroom in 2012, and then 2015 Geopolitics and Empire was born. And at your conference, you had some great speakers, Stephen Coughlin, Michael O'Fallon, James Lindsay, Jay Dyer, John Kleizak, Aaron Cyphers, I think, a bunch of others. And so you've come a long way. And maybe now, sort of to get your big picture view on a lot of the topics that I treat on Geopolitics and Empire, I don't know where to start. But you can start off where you like, but one of the things is this North American Union talk now that's going on, which for me, my number one thing on the podcast is empire, globalism, world government, and everything is related to that. And so how do you see, what's your big picture view on what's going on in the world, Great Reset, all of that?
Well, I'll just start with saying this, and I've said this, I tweeted, and people, it's really hard when you're reading a tweet, people don't really have context. And so people just jump to, make inferences. And I said it's strategically genius, which it is. But it is also exactly the plan laid out in the Club of Rome, their regionalized and adaptive global world system. That's exactly the plan they laid out. It's also the plan that Brzezinski and Kissinger talked about, where they would have a dissolution of nation states, and you would have these remnants of geographical power blocks where the East and the West would be pitted against each other for hegemonic dialectical tensions that would result in a emerging synthesis called the technocracy. And then we also have Orwellian state of the technate, the Technocracy Inc. talked about. So, and they did talk about the North America geographical region as being the technate. So it's kind of looking like that's what's being built. And when you look at the people surrounding the current administration, I've definitely voiced some of my concerns about. I've been covering a lot of the technocratic advances and what looks like a utopian technocratic socialism that's looming. So it is concerning. It does look like an imperialistic venture. Again, though, you can't deny that from a imperialistic strategy, it is genius. It's a very smart move from that perspective, but it is also building those plans. So from a stance of national sovereignty and then, of course, as a byproduct of that, individual sovereignty, it's concerning, especially when you look at the technocratic initiatives and agendas. Yeah,
I'd agree with you. It's genius. It's absolutely genius. I think they are succeeding. And I think it's evil, though, because
evil
genius because they're centralizing power at the global level. There can be nothing good about this, and I think it's going to be planetary because it's we had the European Union is up and running on all four cylinders. North American Union now. I was just reading an article yesterday. African Union Now they want to build a Pan-African parliament. So we got African Union, we got a European Union, we got a North American Union, we got a Southeast Asian Union, we got a South American Union. Bukele of El Salvador's working on Central American Union, and Putin and company are working on the Eurasian Union. And just any thought on the whole, because you mentioned this dialectic, the BRICS multipolar. From day one, I've been saying BRICS and multipolarity is actually it's a move towards world government. Do you have any thought on that?
I do, and I would agree with that. Not necessarily. I don't know. I don't know in what context you mean it, but I think some people mean it more like the BRICS is going to be the world controlling system. I don't necessarily see it that way, but I do think it is absolutely a move towards that agenda. What you laid out is exactly what's in that 1973 Club of Rome document, by the way. I mean, that's exactly the power blocks that they lay out. So I tried to find the actual document online, and it's really hard to find. But those who are familiar with Bill Cooper, he, in his "Behold a Pale Horse" book, he has an appendix that has the document in that book.
I've got it right here.
I have it over there too. Yeah, I'll let you get yours.
I don't mind. I don't even know where it is actually. Club of Rome, where are you? No, I can't find it. I might have it in my library in Croatia, but yeah, I have the old 1970 Club of Rome. Oh wait, I found it.
Yeah. Okay, it's 1973. It's a regionalized and adaptive global.
Let me show it on screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's the screen back on me. I think Mankind at the Turning Point. Club of
there
Rome.
We go. Second report.
And it's somewhere in here. But here it is. Here we go. There we go.
There we go.
Here's the map.
Yep.
Camera back on me. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
That is the map. I got this used book somewhere online. It's from a library. There you go. But I didn't steal it.
Nice.
But anyways, yeah. I mean, you've got the Club of Rome, and then you've got technocracy before Club of Rome. You have that people posting now the 1942 map. Maurice Gomberg published this map in 1942 of the world government divided into regions. You've got 1930s technocracy, technate. But I think I've also been saying from the founding of America, Thomas Jefferson spoke of an empire of liberty, basically creating a United States of the world. And there's a letter, a primary source where Jefferson said, we should make a United States of the Americas. So literally all of the Americas. And so I believe actually this has been a plan.
Well, that's part of the Great Rapprochement. So there was, and William Steed has a book was it 1901, I want to say. I'm blanking, and I have that book too, but I don't have that in front of me. But it's William Steed, and he talks about it in this book that he wrote. And it's the Great Rapprochement was a century prior to the Kissinger China rapprochement, but it's a similar idea. So it was the idea that you would create this Oceania, essentially. So it would be all of the English-speaking countries of the world would become, one. They would become the America of the world, or the Oceania. But yeah, they were talking about it being a one America. And so that would include even like Australia, New Zealand, all the English-speaking countries. So it does look like they're vying for some sort of centralized power. And when you talk about the BRICS, I think it was a 3-hour presentation on Game B this weekend for Rising Tide Foundation. And somebody had asked me about BRICS and saying how they had so much hope for BRICS being, they're all about national sovereignty and they're going to be the hope for the future. And I said, I completely think the opposite, regardless of what, any individual is vying, in that battle may be and what they may stand for. I think that it is exactly what Kissinger and Brzezinski talked about is this hegemonic battle. So if you have this BRICS rising and you have the dollar decreasing, then you're now creating this kind of this competition. And of course, these central banks want to create their central bank digital currency. And then we have this other thing coming. And I think this is what's going to be synthesis, if you will, the Hegelian synthesis. So people are very concerned about BRICS maybe becoming the world currency, and they'll have the total power. They'll be the world dominating centralized locus of power. And I can understand that concern, and that message, that narrative is there very much being promoted. Then you, of course, have this idea, the American bully narrative that, the America is going to create this, even more expanded imperialistic superpower, and so they're going to be the dominant. And then what people don't, and then you also have, which I do see it as kind of separate. Some people think the central bank digital currency will be BRICS. Some people think it's a separate thing. Let's just, for the purpose of the hypothetical for the conversation, say that it is a separate thing. And I understand either way, people being concerned about central bank digital currency, but what people often don't consider is that there's something called the network state. And this is something that Peter Thiel is a huge proponent of. He was he put a lot of money into something, or for him, I guess it wasn't a lot of money, but to most of us plebeian people, it was a lot of money, into something called seasteading. And that was his vision of a network state, but it kind of went belly up. And so he's funneled a lot of interest and support into this network state concept, which is Srinivasan, who's the CTO of Coinbase. And Peter Thiel also has all these other ventures that are centered around things like Bitcoin. He has a company called Prospera, which is Bitcoin cities. The subsidiary of Prospera is called Vitalia. And you just look on their website, they talk about building cities where death is optional. So they couched in the terms longevity, but it's a very transhuman type of agenda. And when you think about concepts like the network state, and you start thinking about these emerging technologies that are occurring, and you think about things like Game B, I know I'm throwing a lot of things out there, but they all do converge. And I think it's very relevant, especially now. I think it's becoming increasingly more imperative that people at least become aware of it, whether you align or not. You can't oppose something you don't know exists. So I think people need to be aware of it. But with the network state, you have the concept is that you're going to have, instead of geographical nation states, you'll have ideological cyber states. And people don't consider that you can be locked out of those network states. So you need a digital passport in order to enter them. And so and they have their own currencies. So whether or not is a central bank digital currency from, the central banks, the IMF, et cetera, or if it's a BRICS system, and it's all still, you're still talking about a tokenization of the economy, and you're talking about a system where you need some sort of a digital ID to enter, and that you can be locked out and you can be controlled. And then when you look at things like the AI World Society, which is the UN 100 plans for the centennial of the UN, this can be found on un100.net, or you can find it on the Boston Global Forum website. That's in partnership with the UN. So this is Michael Dukakis wrote the book, Remaking the World, The Age of Global Enlightenment. He is the former governor of Massachusetts, so may remember that. But he has written this book, and the title alone sounds very new agey, and it definitely is a nod, although with a technocratic bent. And they talk about in this AI World Society how in the centennial of the UN, which of course is 2045, and just for the audience listening, when does Ray Kurzweil say the singularity is nearer? It's no longer near, it's nearer. And that would be 2045. Jim Rutt, who's kind of the grandfather of this Game B concept, he wrote his A Journey to Game B. And in that blueprint, it's kind of a roadmap. And he says it's a roadmap. It's not necessarily a, strict kind of blueprint or prediction, but he says 2045 is kind of going to be the emerging Game B. And so 2045 is when they say we'll have this AI world society. And that is where human governments will be supplanted by AI. We're going to have, medicine and all sorts of other things run by our digital twins. We're going to have 6G technology that harnesses things like the, W bands, wearable body sensor areas. We're going to have, and the 6G, they talk about actually leveraging the human energy to power it. And this sounds like crazy conspiracy theory talk, but you can find the articles that the University of Amherst, Massachusetts has put forth, and they go through this technology and they explicitly say it. Although now some of the newer articles are talking about actually harnessing mitochondria. So it gets even more detailed and really more invasive. But this is, just the Internet of Things tied to the Internet of Bodies, tied to the Internet of nanobio things. And this is where they talk about how we'll have sensors all throughout us. And wherever there's the potential for that type of surveillance that's that intricate, there is the potential for that type of control. And in the AI World Society, they call it a social value reward system. They say it's modeled off of China's what's it called, the social credit system, but that it's not. It's called a social value reward system because that's very euphemistic and it sounds so meritocratic, right? You're earning your value. It's a social value reward system, but it's really the same thing. And they do say it's modeled after China's social credit system. So
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I think more than anything, I see BRICS as kind of I see it rising as a hegemonic battle. It's to create this tension. And I think that the result of that is going to be some sort of a synthesis where the technocracy, whether it be completely top down or whether it looks like a network state type option. And ultimately, I think it's probably going to be a combination because it's really all about opt-in tyranny. So I think they will try and foment, this is, of course, precluding like if certain nations completely extract themselves from the UN and somehow it implodes, and I keep saying it, Trump talks a great game about how he wants to take us out of the UN, and I really hope he does. But, he doesn't even have to make it a political stance. Like this can be purely pecuniary. We just spend too much money on Ukraine, rebuilding Ukraine, and all these other funding all these other things that, we don't need to be funding. We are just in too much debt. We can't fund the UN anymore. Like this is just purely economics, basic math. And if they did that, the last statistic I read was that the United States funds a third of the UN. That's a pretty large chunk. And I think it would be pretty hard for them to continue, at least at the rate that they're going now, without that financial support. So, but if he doesn't, and if the UN keeps going strong, and all of the major nation states are still involved and coordinating and still signing on to all of these initiatives and agendas, they're going to keep moving forward with their plans for the UN 100. Of course, Agenda 2030 is their first track, and then Agenda 2045 it sounds far away, but it's not that far away. But I think while that's going on, you're still going to have this network state building as well, because they recognize that there's always a dissonance. There are people who don't like the top-down approach, and they want to capture the people by using their ideology and weaponizing it against them. So the people who might be more libertarian minded, they appeal to them with this notion of it being decentralized. Although I think decentralized is a bit of a misnomer. I think it's a bit misleading because when you start looking at these technologies like Web3 and the hollow chains and all of these various NoMap, which is now rebranded to S7. But when you start looking into these technologies, they're all interoperable and they're very interconnected. I don't know how you have, complete autonomy, agency, and data privacy when you have all this interoperability. And when you're talking about creating something that is like the one app, they call it D-app, decentralized app, but yet it's the one app is what is the vision for it. So that seems a little oxymoronic.
Yeah, and I just want to go back for a second. I view.
I know I threw out a lot.
No, yeah, and it's all very good explanation. And BRICS for me is like multipolarity. I mean, this North American Union, TechNate, for me, that's multipolarity. Because you've heard people like Dugan and others say creating these civilizational states. Dugan has said, let's create a Eurasian Union. That's multipolarity, multiple poles. For me, multipolarity is regionalism, is European Union, is regional integration. So multipolarity is basically creating the regional unions.
Yep.
And then we have world government, world federation. That is multipolarity. And I always mention, BRICS was coined by a young global leader of World Economic Forum and the banks, Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
And the thing with the multipolaristas, as I like to call them, the BRICS hypers, they have a myopia. They focus on the geopolitical, which I think is the least important. And the more
Yeah.
important is the globalist aspect, where Russia and China, they're implementing the exact same technocracy, And here's an example. The other day, Arnaud Bertrand, he's got a huge account on X. I like it. I follow his stuff. He's a Frenchman who lives in China, multipolarista. And he's talking about my president, Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president. And, Trump said, let's call Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. And Claudia Sheinbaum responds, let's call, what does she say? I'm reading. So Arnaud says, unsurprisingly, it looks like Claudia Sheinbaum has bigger balls than Canada's Trudeau or Polyev, because she's come out and said, let's call America Mexico again, or something like that. And I have to say, sorry, Arnaud, Claudia doesn't have any balls. If she did, she'd do something about the cartels, and she wouldn't be overseeing the implementation of the social credit system. And again, these multipolaristas, it's like people are having their heads chopped off here in Mexico. I know people who have been shaken. They open a business, the next day cartels come and say, give me all of the money you're going to make, or they shut the business down. Like,
Of course,
who cares about Claudia responding to Trump? That's not having balls. Having balls is dealing with the criminals and not implementing digital ID in Mexico. And so I'm going on a rant here, but you mentioned the network states of Theo. He's done that in Honduras and parts of the U.S. And I just read today that Greenland, one of the ideas behind Greenland is they also want to do something similar there.
Yes.
And just to go further again, everything you were laying out, I like to call it the algorithm ghetto, because I had Edwin Black on.
Yep.
I had him on my podcast, and it's social credit. I mean, you laid it all out, these smart cities. Just your further thought on what that's going to look like, because as you said, they can be public or private. It can be a public CBDC. It can be some,
and it can be public-private partnerships.
It's going to be both. I mean, it could be a private coin, and then it's going to be a symbiotic system where I gave the example back in November. I couldn't renew my bank card, so it was a private bank, and the government, public sector, forces the bank to force me to give my Mexican voter ID, which is the digital ID, which I don't have yet. I never took one out, so I couldn't renew my bank account. So it's the public-private partnership, and that's all behind the scenes. You've got Rockefeller Foundation, UN agencies, BlackRocks. It's like this big beast public-private partnership system. So how do you see, living in this system? It's going to be like Edwin Black said, like Jews living in a ghetto, where if you don't abide by the climate ideology, we're seeing people like in Ireland, Enoch Burke. He was a teacher. He did not accept the transgender ideology. They put him in jail. So if you're not accepting whatever thought crime, you'll be shut off. You can't buy food. You can't travel. You can't do nothing. So just your further thoughts on this dystopia, and whether you think they'll be, how much will they be able to implement of it?
Okay, so I agree with you with what you're saying about BRICS, absolutely. But I do think with regionalization, you create these further tensions. So with multipolarity, you're able to create more dialectical poles. And what are the purposes of dialectical poles? Is to create the tension. So you create the Alhaven, which is how you move up. So for those who aren't familiar with my analogy, Hegel talks about the dialectical spiral. And I think of it as a Gnostic Jacob's ladder. Essentially, that's what they outline, is like they envision that they're becoming God. Hegel actually said that, there is no freedom. Humans cannot have any freedom at all without complete subservience to the state. If that's not an oxymoron, I don't know what is, but that is what they believe. So, the state equals God. And the Aufheben is this term in German. It's a very oxymoronic term that means to lift up and preserve while simultaneously canceling and tearing down. And this is where, of course, the Frankfurt School gets their concept of Aufheben de culture, which I don't think needs much explanation. It translates to cancel culture. But the Aufheben is how you move up the rungs on the ladder. And so it's this synthesis, but you're synthesizing while extracting from the previous opposite poles. And so each step is, that moving up the ladder. So it looks like you're canceling, but you're canceling the shell while extracting the parts and moving up. And so I see with this multipolarity, you're creating these tensions that are even more, they're power blocks. I mean, and that is how the trilaterals who talked about these types of regionalization as well, they describe them as being power blocks. And so, of course, when you have power blocks, you have warring factions. And I think that when you have that is intentional. You're creating these warring factions so that they can emerge with their synthesis. And their synthesis, as they've always said, it would be the technocracy. And that I do think is what we're seeing. So when you talk about the network state and what's that's going to look like, I think it's going to be kind of like the metaverse on steroids. But I mean, it's right now, right now we have just passwords that people get locked out, right? I mean, it's impossible to keep up with all of these passwords, but if you don't have your password, you can't get into your Coinbase or your, for your Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency wallet. So that's just at the very basic. That's your digital ID is just your password, and that's simple. And we're so accustomed to it. And this is how they play these games. It's incrementalism, right? So you get so used to it that it's okay. Well, I just need the password, and I'll just start getting better about remembering all of them, filing them, and so I can keep track. But what happens when your digital ID becomes, in order to enter a certain network state, you have to align with a specific ideology. So these various network states are going to be ideologically united rather than geographically. So, to pick something kind of benign, in the health and fitness sphere, like everybody's very passionate, and their diet and their exercise regime is the best, and everybody else's is wrong. Never mind the fact that we have bio-individuality and everybody is, certain things work for some people versus others. Forget the fact there are differences between men and women. I mean, on and on, but they know best, and there's one way. So, you're going to take like a vegan network state and a carnivore network state. Well, what happens if you say something, or you're caught, somebody catches a picture of you, or worse, what if they catch your digital twin doing something that violates the terms of the network state? And now you're locked out. And your network state is your access to everything. This is where you have your currency, your whole world becomes virtual through these apps. And I don't know, I can see a very dystopian scenario. Yeah.
All right. Well, I just, I'd like to see things as they are. And I just see them accelerating on this front. How long it will take them, who knows? And I guess just to go,
Oh, I'm sorry. I would just add to that, of course it's the technologies aren't quite where they imagine it to be yet. As I said, I did a 3-hour presentation on Game B. I've been building on my channel as well, a series of episodes, because there's so much there. And Game B started in 2011, and the initial intention was to create a political party. It was called the Emancipation Party. Jim Rutt, who's kind of as I said, like the grandfather of Game B, had started these Stanton meetings in Virginia, and he had several other, at the time, not that well-known thinkers who were members trying to create this Emancipation Party. But certainly now, many of these people are very well-known, like Brett Weinstein, who, was intellectual dark web. He was recently at the Rescue of the Republic, giving his speech on how it's not a republic if you can keep it, it's a republic if you can phoenix it. And he was involved in these very early Stanton meetings where they were creating an emancipation party, which had a platform that was very aligned with like a Bernie Sanders platform. One of the most prominent seminal components was that they wanted to create a UBI. And it did not go over very well. Jim Rutt explains how the boomers were all on board, but that you can't really start a political movement with boomers, that's not going to be very effective. He says that Gen X was, kind of mixed, but he thought he could corral them. But the millennials really rejected it. And he said it was ironic because they were all in favor of the platform. They loved the UBI and the universal health care and all of these various platforms, but they didn't like the concept of a political party. That was anathema to them. They were such anarchists. And so they splintered, and it was Thor Mueller who advised him that they keep the name Game B. Game B was kind of the social operating system for this political movement. And he said you should keep that for branding purposes. And they splintered, and they've been developing this. I give you this whole backstory all just to say that, at the time, it was really just people throwing out ideas that were kind of centered around this vision for the future and this trans-political movement, as they call it. But now what's happened, and they're very active, like as of this week, Jim Rutt was asking his Facebook group, what the domain name should be. People were suggesting that he start, a Facebook, a website. And so he's, fielding for what the name should be. So they're very active now. But what's happened now is the technologies are catching up. So there's no longer people sitting around and having conversations online or behind closed doors about philosophical, sociological concepts. This is now, how is it going to be executed and implemented with the emerging, and that's what they call them, emerging technologies. And they're talking about things like tokenization. And they're talking about UBIs, but this is through a tokenized economy. They talk about, this is a post-capitalist world where we'll have the UN calls it or the World Economic Forum calls it a well-being economy. They call it regenerative. They have various different names of, but it's all a degrowth post-capitalist world that they're envisioning. And they talk about these concepts that are very esoteric at the moment, a lot of like quantum physics type of ideas, but really what they envision is building a noosphere that is controlled through technology. And at the moment, we're not actually there. But when you start looking at concepts like heart math, which the Conscious Evolution Foundation, Barbara Marx Hubbard is behind, the Rockefellers were involved in, and they, it's all based on elements of science. I mean, we do have an electromagnetic resonance in our heart. Our field is, they say up to 12 feet, and some people's are further, some are shorter, some are stronger, some are weaker, but we all have an electromagnetic field that our heart radiates. But they're talking about creating global coherence. And now they're talking about creating not just heart global coherence through that electromagnetic resonance, but they're talking about heart-brain coherence. And, again, they're not quite there, but they're building out this framework, and the technology is catching up. And I don't know, when you think about a noosphere where we're all in this global brain, it's one thing when we still have individual agency and we still have free will and freedom of conscience and consciousness, then that's one thing, you can opt out. But when you start talking about the types of technologies that they're envisioning and they're trying to build, and I don't know how far along they are. I don't know if I could be privy to that. Silicon Valley tends to work very closely with agencies like DARPA, where things are classified and behind closed doors. So I don't know. They may be further along, they may not be. But the vision that they're laying out is one where we might not have the option to opt out. So
that's the scary part, where you can't opt out. So you're literally going to, when I talked to Edwin Black, he said in the algorithm ghetto, if you don't abide, like they won't even send Stasi to your door. They won't need to. They just shut, because there's going to be no cash. Everything's going to be through an app, and they just turn it off. And you will be literally sitting in your home and starve to death in a week or 2 or 3. And that's it. And your neighbor's not going to help you because they'll shut him off or her off. And that's sort of this, as you mentioned, this noosphere. And just to go a bit further to the transhuman thing, because we're talking about technocracy now, a little bit about the transhuman. I want to play this clip from Brian Johnson that was, I think, was with Carrie Barry Weiss, another one of those Pied Pipers. And let me see, share sound. Here we go. I think you can see him, yeah.
Okay, yes, I see.
And she asks him if he thinks he's going to die, and I think this is a core aspect. Here's the clip.
Do you think that you're going to die?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
You think you're going to live forever?
Forever is not a concept the human mind can contemplate. But will we be able to radically extend life and beyond our preconceived imaginations? Yes. Will it happen before my natural limit right now, which is, my life expectancy is probably like, 80, 90, like something like that if I maintain my health. But the technology is moving so quickly that it will, the species is going to either survive or die in this moment much sooner than my life expectancy would turn up.
I think a lot of people will hear about what you.
So, I mean, it's, I think is never going to happen. No technology will enable us to live, to become immortal. But this is what these people believe. And just to get your thoughts on the transhuman angle, with Corona, what happened in the 2020s, the PCR tests, I believe, part of that. I had on Zoe Smith not long ago, a medical coder. She found the actual CDC document that said PCR tests were being sent for DNA sequencing. So they're taking our DNA. Some of the others, I can almost envision Matrix. I feel like a lot of these sci-fi movies were them letting us know about our planet. It's kind of like Alex Jones, who 15 years ago was saying North American Union bad, and now he's promoting it. And it's kind of like you're filtering into the consciousness these ideas because they're going to be implemented later on. So Hunger Games, I think that's one literal scenario of that's smart cities, Hunger Games or Maze Runner.
Yeah.
And then you've got Matrix, where they're literally, it's Neuralink. I mean, Matrix, when Keanu Reeves unplugs from his brain, I mean, that's Neuralink. That's BCI, brain computer interface. And so I feel like that's what they want to do. I don't know if it was to listen to your stuff or someone else's, but that they ultimately want to integrate. I mean, Klaus Schwab said it, merging man with machine. So I think they want to integrate us. That's like the last phase. They call it biodigital convergence. There's other terms for it. So just on that sort of, that's like the final capstone. Your thoughts on transhumanism?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on transhumanism, and none of them are all that warm fuzzy, but this idea of living forever. So it's very interesting because it depends on what they mean by it. So for some of them, they really mean, you've all know Harari, you hear a lot of these transhumanists, and they don't all agree on exactly what that looks like, but a lot of them talk about how our consciousness will be uploaded, like to a cloud, hive-borg mind type of scenario. And it's ironic because, they say we have no free will, we have no freedom of consciousness, we have no individual consciousness, but somehow the thing that we don't have is that thing that's going to be uploaded into this noosphere, and then we're going to live forever, which is, doesn't really make any sense at all on the face of it. But so it depends kind of what they mean by live forever. I don't think that for them, they have this vision of conscious evolution. And conscious evolution is that when he says we're either going to go extinct or we're going to live forever. And this is the meta crisis that a lot of these people talk about, the evolutionary leader, a lot of the game B proponents, the Theosophists. I mean, this is really just different terminology for things that Madame Blavatsky was talking about. And it's really even harkens back to some of the ancient mystery cults and Neoplatonic kind of schools of thought. But it's this idea that, we can spiritually evolve and we can ascend. And so they think that that's how they're going to live forever. And in the physical realm, they don't think the physical realm is all that important. And so that it doesn't, they're not necessarily speaking about our physical beings living forever. Now, I do see a lot of movements, the longevity movement, if you will, where they're trying to extend life, and where some of it is through merging with technology. Some of it is, Ray Kurzweil, I think, takes 150 supplements a day. He thinks that's going to, and like every few minutes, he has to stop and take a pill so he can extend his life. But I think a lot more of it is this idea of a floating consciousness and evolving. And of course, they think that we have to co-create. So we have to choose to enter this. So it's always an opt-in tyranny. And I think from a biblical framework, regardless of whether or not you subscribe to the biblical framework, is that, that's actually less relevant. But if you look at that, both God and Satan want to be chosen. They can't force their will upon you. And so I feel like that's what we're seeing. It's always an opt-in. We saw that when you talk about the 2020s era, it was an opt-in tyrannical situation, right? They people say, oh, I was forced to do this. No, you may not have liked the choices you had, but you were not forced to do anything. You chose that option. And I keep saying, if people had not chosen to wear face diapers, that, we probably wouldn't have gotten to the pharmaceutical end. Because I think that was a beta compliance test. And they had to see how many people would opt in, how many people would choose this. And of course, they use tactics of trauma-based mind control. They terrorize you, they scare you. And so people are, when you're in that kind of a state of fear, you're much more suggestible and much more susceptible to whatever solutions they propose. And we very much witnessed that. A lot of people did take the bait and they were willing to do it. But in terms of transhumanism, it's really interesting because you think about transhumanism as like this man merging with machines. I just did a show on outlining the fifth industrial revolution, because I know a lot of people are familiar with the fourth industrial revolution. Klaus Schwab wrote his book. The World Economic Forum did their very famous video where they talk about how you'll own nothing and be happy. And of course, Elon Musk is involved in fomenting every facet of the fourth industrial revolution with every single one of his companies. You mentioned Neuralink. Of course, he was partners with Charles Lieber, who patented the Neuralace. And, you could go down the list. All of his companies are integral to fomenting the fourth industrial revolution. But the experts actually, the quote unquote experts, of course, they actually say we're in the midst of the fifth industrial revolution, that we've already moved past the fourth. And they've outlined the sixth and seventh already. And when they're talking about the fifth and the sixth, it's really interesting because they keep saying it's human-centered. It's human-centered. And they love to redefine terms. So you have to pay a lot of attention. What do they mean by human-centered? And what they really mean is we're moving into this era where we're we're working with the machines before we do the complete conversion. But it's really how the machine is learning from us. They're extracting from us. And of course, because the machine, can't learn on its own, it has to be programmed. That's how AI works. But the further it advances, the more that it becomes intertwined. And then when you throw things like cybernetics and systems theories into the mix, of course, we become impacted. And, our psychological and physiological frameworks do get altered as a byproduct of these cybernetic feedback loops. We've already seen that in so many regards. So when they're moving towards this transhumanism, they do envision part of it is our, working in tandem with machine. Part of it is our merging with machine. And then there are the people who believe we're going to move into a completely post-human world. They actually have several handbooks on post-humanism. I don't know who's going to program these entities, but these machines, but they do seem to think that's where we're headed.
I like what you said about opt-in and God and the devil and the biblical worldview. And I think it is precisely that, because, God could have saved us all this trouble, but then we would have been robots that he programmed to worship him. But he gave us this free will. And I think he knew everything that would have happened. And that's why, he provided the solution in the form of Jesus. But the devil, the same, he's trying to put us using all this technologies, mimicking God with God can see everything, the algorithm ghetto, this total surveillance. And so he wants to force us into a corner, the devil, where he wants to force us to opt in to worship, I believe, him. Yep. To the point of death. And it's, those people who say, no, I'd rather die than bow down. And so I think, he's carefully creating it so people will you'll always have a choice to say no, but that will come at a supremely high cost that many people will not want to take. And just real quick, just to further thought, I want to go on to the Theosophy stuff, but you commented on my Substack, which was one of the reasons I asked you to come on, the CBDCs, Bitcoin, crypto. I feel my position has always been, and I'm seeing other people talk about this now, that Bitcoin was created by them as a way to whet people's appetites to start the process of getting us into this whole CBDC thing. I don't know which way it's going to go. It might be the digital gold. I could see Bitcoin crashing and that being used as the pretext to bring in CBDCs. Just your thoughts on Bitcoin, crypto, CBDCs.
I have always said that very similarly, I think it is a way to, you talked about the films and how a lot of sci-fi films are kind of an operational preparation of the environment to, kind of like predictive programming. And I see crypto very much that way. I know people argue with me and they'll talk about Bitcoin technology and they'll tell me, I just don't understand it. And I don't know how it's completely decentralized and that's not possible. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I was reading that the CIA created Bitcoin. So I'm pretty sure that, there's a lot of things that you can break into. I get that it's more complex, but any formula that can be created can also be hacked into. And it can be co-opted. So I'm not necessarily saying that that's the scenario that will occur. I think what's more likely is that it will be regulated out. So you'll have people who are drawn into using this because they want the decentralization. They see it as their rebellion. And then you'll have a top-down regulation that makes it no longer viable. You'll always have black markets of anything, but it will no longer be viable in the mainstream currency. And so that'll be the way that they then, shift you over to something like a central bank digital currency, or they shift you over to these, quote unquote, DeFi, decentralized finances, which are these network state type of Web3 technologies. And when you look at that, they keep saying it's decentralized. They keep saying you have data privacy and, that it's agent-centered is another terminology. It's peer-to-peer. We keep talking about these terms, which sound great. But then when you look at the the outlines that they've laid out, and they're talking about these interoperable capacity, I don't know how that's really possible. How do you have both simultaneously? Now, I get that I'm not a computer programmer. I don't build these technologies. So other people can just tell me how I just don't know enough. And that I'm entirely open to that possibility. But to me, it feels like a movie I've seen before. I have the same conversation with Marxists who tell me I just haven't read him thoroughly enough. And I just don't understand the philosophy enough. And I was never a supporter of Marx, but I was a staunch existentialist. I wrote my college thesis on existentialism, which is just rebranded Marxism, honestly, and Gnosticism. And it's embarrassing to look back at how, fond of it I was. I was very enamored and infatuated with those philosophies. And so, I think I have a pretty good handle on it. I've read quite a bit of it. And I had a very different viewpoint then when I was being very indoctrinated, in the school system than I do now, having a broader context and looking at these philosophies and now looking at these technologies. And I'm looking at the people who are supporting these technologies, and they seem to have the same philosophy and worldview. All of these people who are talking about the network state and the game B, it just looks like utopian techno-socialism. I don't really know how else to label it. And utopia means nowhere, so it may sound great, but I don't know where it's going to be a reality.
I mean, there's so many things to bring up, but one of them was what you just mentioned. I'm noticing a lot of the Bitcoin bros are on board with North American Union. And that goes back, just to get your thought then on the Pied Pipers. How is it that you've got, we're seeing in all podcasting space, independent media, alternative media, a lot of controlled opposition. I think it's becoming very clear now. I call them Pied Pipers, where Alex Jones was railing against globalism. Now he's done a complete 180. He's promoting Elon Musk and transhumanism and technocracy, and he's saying, let's make a North American Union. You've got the Russell Brands. You've got there's just so many examples here. And now I'm seeing a lot of the Bitcoin maxis saying, yes, let's integrate Canada and US. And I'm like, how did this happen? What are your thoughts on how there's a portion of alternative media that has gone full globalist?
So I call it the indie media. So, and this is just kind of like a carryover nominalism from my film days. When I was an actress and then I was a film producer, and there's there's what they would call independent film, and then there was what it was called indie film. So just for people who are not necessarily super versed, and of course the whole distribution model has completely changed now because we don't really have a studio model anymore. I mean, they still exist, but distribution is very different with streaming, with Netflix and Hulu and all those. So it's not really a very valid analogy anymore. But for those who have been in the industry or are familiar, they'll really get it. But it's this idea that you think it's independent. But indie, in order to get an indie SAG budget, it's millions of dollars. I don't know how indie that is. I mean, I don't have a few $1 million in my back pocket to be like, oh, I have this vision for some art and I'm just going to go get some people together and make a film. I wish I did. There are a lot of things I would do, but I don't have that. And I'm not saying nobody does, but it's very rare. And the people who do, it's usually not a very independent environment. They're usually collaborating with people who have connections to things that are a little bit more coordinated, shall we say. And you see that in the film industry. So that there was independent, which are, people who really were just like grassroots scraping by. They might make something for a few $1,000s. They were able to piece together somebody who could get an injection of maybe $20,000. And of course, I'm talking about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. So it was a different market, but $10,000-$15,000 is not that much money for a film, but they're like, that was big money to them. They're like, okay, we can get some cameras, we can hire some people, we're going to make something happen. We're going to make some art. And that's very different than the people who are making the $5, $10, $20 million films, and they're still called indie. So that's just my analogy. What I'm seeing is in the media sphere, there's something very similar. You've got these podcasters who, I didn't even have a microphone. I didn't have a microphone when I started. I literally had my Air Mac, it wasn't even like a real computer. It was like an Air Mac. They're great. No, not to knock the Air Mac. It served me well. But I didn't even have a microphone. I had no equipment or anything. It was like me talking to a computer and, talking to somebody on the other end of it. And occasionally I would have somebody come over if I was fortunate enough to do this in person. And I didn't have a camera. It was like my computer on Zoom filming us, So that's really independent. It's just me. Nobody's controlling me. And it's whoever else wanted to be a part of the conversation, we go. There's people who they seem independent because they're not part of maybe the mainstream media, but they seem to have a lot of support behind them, shall we say, and potentially some money behind them. And I have this theory that there's kind of like a counter Intel Pro to what used to be called Operation Mockingbird. The powers that shouldn't be, if you will, recognize that a lot of people see the issue with the mainstream media. They don't trust the mainstream media. They are aware of things like Operation Mockingbird. And so now they need people in a more trustable package. More reliable, consumer reliable package. And so there's a lot of alternative media personalities, and not just personality, but, or entities. I mean, we saw this with Tenet Media. I think was a great example of this because that was exposed, right? I don't know about you, but I've never been paid $200,000 to do an episode. A lot of money. A lot of people don't make that in a year. That's big money for an episode. And I don't know that all of them got that, but that was in that, exchange that was released to the public. So some of them were making considerable money. That's not independent. You can't. And I know a lot of them pushed back and said, well, we had no idea. Oh, yeah, we're just getting these big paychecks. When do you get a paycheck like that and you never ask, or you're never in the back of your head, why does somebody want to pay me so much money for this? Is there a narrative they might be supporting? And I can't imagine that there was no steering, whether they're aware of it or not. I'm not accusing individuals because, there are the useful idiots. And I don't say that to be pejorative. It's just, that is a natural byproduct of situational pressures. People get steered, and they're not always aware that they're being steered, but sometimes they don't want to lose a friend. They don't want to offend somebody. They need to pay a bill. There's situational pressures, and that, leads them to be steered in certain directions and to support certain narratives. But then there's also the people who know they're part of an entity. They know that they're getting a specific paycheck to be a mouthpiece to support a specific narrative. And they're going along with it because either they agree with it and they're like, rah, rah, I'm supporting this cause, or because they don't care and they get to do this and make a living. And But it's a really convenient way for, say, like an intelligence apparatus or a foreign entity or somebody with a lot of money that wants to steer, psychological warfare and information warfare to inject, because they're much cheaper to pay off. I mean, what's going to buy off an indie, again, not necessarily independent, but indie media personality or outfit is much less than what's going to pay off, like, MSNBC or, Fox News or whatever. But
yeah, and I'm just using the latest example of Alex Jones based on what he's openly said. One of my inspirations for starting a podcast like Geopolitics and Empire, one of many inspirations was, early Alex Jones, early InfoWars. Right. And I wanted to start interviewing a lot of the people that he was interviewing, which I have, the William Engdahls and the Francis Boyles. And my face has graced the front page of InfoWars back in 2020 when I did an interview with Francis Boyle. And so there's that, but then I'm shocked, like when Jones openly says, yeah, let's integrate Canada and USA. And I'm like, in his own words, he's now proven to us that he's made a Faustian bargain. Like you said, we don't know the back end, but he's openly said, yeah, he's promoting globalism. And so now there's some psyop here, there's some deception, something insidious is going on. That kind of leads me then to my next question with the whole new age.
Well, I'll just speak to that, because with Alex, I with AJ, I call him, but I think that he's had a noose around his neck for so long. And I can't imagine I'm not justifying his behavior or, disagreeing with what you're saying. But I mean, if there's somebody who is going to be controlled, he's the prime candidate. I mean, they were trying to take everything that he built, putting him through the rigor of the courts and the attacks and, everything that they were trying to stack against him. And who was coming to be rising to the opportunity to be his savior? It looks like Elon Musk, in a lot of ways, is now his boss. And that's very convenient. Take this trusted, some people think he was controlled from the beginning. I can't really speak to that. I didn't watch him in the super early years. I wish I did. I was not, I had my reasons, but, I didn't. And I kind of wish I had. But, so I can't really speak too much to that. I think anybody who grows to that magnitude where they have, such a big voice, there's always going to be some sort of situational pressures. But I think what we're seeing now does look much more openly controlled, as you've alluded to. And I think a lot of that does have to do with how tight the noose around his neck was. And now he's kind of like, okay, well, if I'm going to keep going at all, and it does look like Elon kind of stepped in, and it seems convenient.
Elon is his sugar daddy. But speaking of New Age, Theosophy, Lucis Trust. I mean, that's the other thing. I did a podcast back in August with Terry Wolf up in Canada, where I've been pointing out, on top of everything that we're saying, alternative media has been pushing New Age, Gnosticism, Theosophy, including Alex Jones and InfoWars. And I've shown this before. This is from I've attended a Lucis Trust meeting. This is 2009.
The Arcane School.
And I've got, this is from May 2009, attended their meeting in their headquarters in Geneva. And just to get your thoughts on how the Theosophy stuff plays in, a lot of people have done a lot of great work. You've got Aleister Crowley, you've got Ron Hubbard, who wanted to sort of continue the work of Crowley. These guys wanted to bring about the Antichrist, the end of the world. They wanted to be Antichrist. They wanted to bring about, the apocalypse. I mean, they're crazy, and so
Lord Maitreya.
Yeah, Maitreya, and so there's and a lot of this stuff. There's all this occultism. How do you sort of factor into everything we're talking about?
Well, I actually just did a presentation on Lucis Trust yesterday. I have done a tremendous amount of work on this topic over the past year, really. But yes, I mean, I'd say the inception of the UN is really to foment this one world religion, which looks like a Luciferian theosophical religion, is what it looks like. And I do see that in the alternative media. There's a lot of people pushing this kind of Gnostic, New Age, spiritualist movement. And And yeah, the UN, when you look at Lucius Trust especially, but there are a lot of them. There's the World Parliament of the Religion, there's the Temple of Understanding. I mean, there's all these various NGOs that are tied to the UN that whose mission is to create this interfaith movement. And of course, they say that they welcome everyone, right? This is a perennialism. That's the Theosophical religion. It's not. They say it's not a religion. It's a perennial philosophy. And there's, of course, now the evolutionary leaders are writing things like cosmoerotic humanism. They call it, it's the first values, first principles of evolving perennialism. That's what it is. You can find this at officeofthefuture.com because they're futurists. They can see the future, of course. And this idea of summoning the Lord Maitreya this is what World Invocation Day is all about. I did several shows last year about World Invocation Day, and they have their prayer. They end it with closing the door where evil dwells. I'm not sure which side they're referencing there, but it is about summoning Lord Maitreya, and it's about the Christ. They keep saying the Christ. And I think this is very misleading. So if you were to believe in the concept of Lucifer, the devil, he's supposed to be the most beautiful angel, and he's a master of deception, right? And I think this is very deceiving for Christians and for even, non-believers, because everything's couched in love and light. This is this deception. The great deception of Theosophy is that it all is couched in these very warm hug type of terms. But what they are saying when they say the Christ, and when they talk about Christ consciousness, they're very specifically saying that this is not the Christ, Jesus Christ, as in the Christ of Christianity. And the Theosophists like Blavatsky, like Bailey, say that they are diametrically opposed to any monastic religion. So that would be, traditional Judaism. They welcome Judaic Kabbalism, but not traditional Judaism. Any traditional kind of Christianity, and even Islam, because it's a monastic belief system. They reject it because it's an inverted worldview, and it's pantheistic. And actually, it's really panentheistic because they believe the God is within. So it's not just, God is all one, but this is, kind of a reminiscent of the ancient mystery cults and the Neoplatonic kind of belief system, where they would talk about the undifferentiated all, right? That the Theosophists say we come from source. This is the Mother Nature, Gaia, right?
Just to get you further thought on that, I mean, I think it's the original lie in the garden where the serpent, Lucifer, the devil said, "You are gods, you can be gods." And yet, yes, even Jesus and God says we are a type of God, but we're still subject to a hierarchy and an authority where God is the boss, right? And we are made in his image, but we answer to him. And the devil said, "You are gods." And that's what I'm hearing these Christ consciousness people, David Icke and others, saying, "You are God." They always use the thing, remember who you are. And they're very sneaky, but it's like, well, they don't finish the thought yet, but it's like, you are gods. And you just kind of have to come to that realization. They talk about doing shit. It's like I'm almost mimicking Christianity, where you have sin, and then they talk about do your shadow work. Well, it's like in Christianity, you can't solve your sin. Christ has to do it for you. But in Christ consciousness, it's like you can deal with your sin or shadow work, so on and so forth. And they talk about like we are one big consciousness. I just listened to Dyke the other day saying that we are basically, our spirit or consciousness is just one fragment of this bigger consciousness. And for me, it's all anti-Christian beliefs. Just your further thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is, again, building the vision of the noosphere, right? We are just single cells in a big organism, a super organism of humanity is what they talk about. If you're hearing me, you're seeing me shuffle through my papers, because I actually have a direct quote, which I can probably just find it on I can pull it up on the phone too. I probably have it there. But it's a direct quote from Madame Blavatsky herself, where she talks about how Lucifer is the real God, and how, because it's a Gnostic viewpoint. They believe that the God of the Bible is the evil demiurge who has withheld the gnosis, the knowledge, wisdom. Theosophy means divine wisdom. And they feel that God is the evil God, the evil demiurge that withheld the knowledge from man, and that it is Lucifer, who's the light bearer, who enlightens the humanity and brings them, gives them the gnosis through the light. He shines the light and illuminates them. And she says that right here. Okay, I'm going to read it to you because I don't want to butcher it. So Satan will not be Satan will now be shown in the teachings of the secret doctrine, allegorized as good, and sacrifice a good of wisdom under different name. Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and the benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind, for it is he who is the harbinger of light, bright and radiant. Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the woman created by Jehovah, and it was he who first whispered in her ear, "You eat there, and you shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil." He can only be regarded in light of a savior. Lucifer is divine and terrestrial light in the Holy Ghost, and Satan at one and the same, and it now stands that Satan is in us. He is our mind, our tempter, our redeemer, our intelligent liberator, and our savior from pure animalism.
There you go. And she had a magazine called Lucifer, and then Alice Bailey Loses Trust continues on that work.
Yep.
And I just want to go back to what you said for a moment with this upsurge now in Gnosticism. So I feel like, we've got the New World Order. We had the counter to that, like people just waking up and realizing what's going on. We can call that alternative media.
Right.
As you already mentioned, they understood that people would start discerning, and so they created like if you had Fox News or CNN, whatever, left or right version, that's the New World Order. And then you get they create like the alternative Fox News, let's say InfoWars or something, which they manage. And then any third iteration would be sort of like us, where we're just looking at really what's going on. And now you get like Alex Jones and Russell Brand and all these people who are the new narrative network. And then I think there's a layer beyond that that's even more like secretive, where because you mentioned the demiurge, Gnosticism, and now there's people that I started to see pop up, like this guy called Israel Anderson, which I don't know if you heard about him. He's catching momentum, but he's saying he's not a Gnostic, that he's a Christian, but then he's literally preaching, it's like gaslighting. He's saying the God of the Old Testament is Satan, which is like demiurge. And then he says like Jesus came down as an alien on an UFO. And then I see people like Amazing Polly. I like Amazing Polly's work. And for a time, she was promoting Israel Anderson. So it's like she's doing really great work. And then she's ever so slightly seating Israel Anderson in. She kind of stopped doing that. You get what I'm saying? So it's kind of like they have to walk very carefully because we can really see this. And they're trying to trick us
She's looking more and more like a disinfo agent. I can point to many things that seem to indicate that. But yes, I see a lot of this, not to just shine the light on her, but in general, we do see this quite often. And it's with they sprinkle, a little bit of truth, and they're luring people in. I think this is the prime time for them to create this movement of reviving Theosophy and Gnosticism, because people are searching for truth. They know they've been lied to. This is the time. People have been lied to, and people feel betrayed. They feel deceived, and they're searching. They're now open, but it's the perfect time to, if you were to try and co-opt and you were to try and misdirect, to mislead people with narratives that seem like I have the real truth, and everybody wants they want the gnosis, right? So it's a great opportunity for that. And you're right, there's so many of them, and it's very appealing to people who are either searching the truth or who who maybe kind of have a more like a egotistical, narcissistic bent, because you're giving them the gnosis and they have the answers, and it's just too complicated. You can't understand it. But as I love to say, Nietzsche said they muddy the waters to make it appear deep, and that does seem to be a lot of what we're seeing now. It was just in the fires. Yesterday I found out that the Theosophical Society near Pasadena burnt down. And I'm shocked at the responses. I'm getting so many people saying that they're cheering it. They're saying, "Well, that's demonic. That's evil. It's so great that that's burned down." But I read a lot of these texts, and a lot of people don't really read them. They're dark, but that's what scholarship is. And I think that it's incumbent upon light to shine. You can't, like, conspiracy, evil, all of these sinister plans can only survive in the dark. So we need light to be shown on it. We need it to be exposed. You can't defeat an enemy you don't know exists. And right, as the old adage, know thy enemy. You can't know thy enemy if it's hidden and buried and burned. So I actually think it's, sorry, yeah.
That's the evidence. I mean, it's like, I got the documents. This Alex Jones, here's my Lucifer's Trust meeting pamphlet. And in here they talk about how Lucifer's Prometheus, right? He's the good guy. And I had one more point I was going to make, just to what you were saying earlier. I subscribe to the Lucifer's Trust newsletter, and in the past couple of months, they explicitly said that they were sending their love energies to the World Economic Forum meetings, to the United Nations meetings.
Oh yeah,
and they said they called all of these different international governmental meetings cycles of conferences, and they openly said, just to what you said earlier, that all of these cycles of conferences, the World Economic Forum meetings, which is going to happen in 10 days, the same day as Trump's inauguration, the UN summits, all of these different meetings, that these are preparations for the unveiling of Lucifer or the Maitreya. They say that themselves, and that he's here, and that humanity, it's going to be a shock to unveil the Antichrist. And so they have to sort of prep the ground. And that's part of, I think, what we're talking about now, alternative media, New Age, and Gnostic. They're slowly preparing the ground for us to accept, to embrace these ideas. And I guess, what do we do? We've looked at all this madness, New World Order, technocracy, transhumanism, Theosophy. What sort of your response, and what do we do? It looks bleak, but what are your thoughts?
Well, so my thought is that I'm really counting on the individual. It's really incumbent upon the individual to exercise their free will. If Gnosticism is your bag, I think you're being deceived, and I don't think that's the best path, but I support you in choosing it. And I mean that really genuinely. What I want to see preserved is free will. The ability to have freedom of consciousness, the ability to think for ourselves and to make our own choices, have freedom of agency. And I think that's really what's really at jeopardy when we look at all of these things, whether it be the new social operating system for civilization, whether it be these emerging technologies that are going to, essentially extinct us if we don't play ball. Or whether it's, some sort of a top-down kind of, control grid system that we're being forced into, whatever it may be, or whether it's a one-world religion that just, pulls the wool over our eyes, where we're all drugged in, whether literally or metaphorically, into joining this collective consciousness and being subsumed into a noosphere where we no longer have individual agency. Regardless of which of these options, they all seem very bleak to me, but they depend on us. And so I think we really do have a lot more power than people think. People hear all these things, and my intention in sharing this information, I say it's inform, inspire, empower. It is never to blackmail. It is to give you the information, because knowledge is power, and they do weaponize truths, So the more you know, the more you can discern. And my hope is that people will be inspired. They will have from the information to take action and empowered to exercise their free will. And, I give the example of the 2020, and if people had just said no, I don't think that things would have advanced. A lot of this is compliance tests. And if each person just exercises according to their own integrity, I think we'd see a very different future than the one that they're trying to build. And I know that doesn't sound like it's not a smoking gun, like what do we do? But I actually think it's quite powerful.
Yeah, I think one big part of the solution is just individuals not complying. There's taking our money elsewhere, saying no. I had a guest on, Alex Thompson, who said practice saying no to petty tyranny. They want you to use this app or that, scan that QR code. No, and no, and at the very least, that's going to stave off for a while.
Sure.
This oncoming nose here, as you say. Is there anything that I haven't brought up that you think is important also to get across? Any other things that you're researching or?
I don't know. I feel like we covered quite a bit. Yeah. I think we've kind of been and tied it all together, because that's I guess the only thing I just really do want to leave people with is, and I'll just repeat myself because I think it does sound very bleak, and I don't want people to be black-pilled. I know that what is coming down the pike, when you talked about how they want to bring about Lord Maitreya, that was what World Invocation Day was all about. And they were talking about how last year World Invocation Day was really special because of the moon cycle. And they have a vision for 2025. And Alice Bailey writes that in her Externalization of the Hierarchy. I think she writes it in a couple of her other works as well. But they talk about, and she's not the only one. A lot of these Theosophists believe that 2025 is the year of the Lord Maitreya, which is the Antichrist. And they're very excited about it. And so they have a lot of plans for 2025. And I think they're really going to try and do whatever they can to bring these plans to fruition. So it's kind of the I guess immunization of the eschaton, right? They want to bring the end time. They want to bring the Antichrist now. So I would say that for people not to get caught up and be reactionary, for people to really try and keep their wits about them. And, no matter what looks like, no matter how bad things look like they're getting, you still have a lot of control over a lot of things in your day-to-day life. And it sounds very cheesy and corny, but take control over the things you can take control over, and the things that fuel you. The things that empower you, the things that make you feel good, that, fill yourself with love, joy, and productivity, and things that you can be proud of. And I know, again, that sounds like cheesy and corny, but it's really true. They want to rob you of your joy, and they want to extract from you. Well, the humans are going to be in all of these various systems that we've laid out. They need us to opt in. They need us to be the driver. And if we say no, and we also do things that make us happy and fulfilled and feel a sense of purpose, I think a lot of their plans start to fall apart.
Yeah, and I just want to add again, I used to be a big fan of Nick Cave, and the Bad Seeds have seen Nick Cave perform back in Chicago many years ago, and I still follow his work loosely and occasionally listen to Nick Cave's music, and he flirts with Christianity a lot, which is, he says the only things there are to sing about are what is a God, love, and death. And I post some stuff from him, and I have listeners say he's World Economic Forum. Show me where he's attended World Economic Forum. And, if he does have some liberal globalist ideas, so what? He's an artist, and I'm not going to, no one is equipped to throw the first stone, right? As Jesus said. And so, give me a break. Let me listen to my Nick Cave music. But anyways, he recently, he's got his Red Hand files, and people can send him questions, and he answers some of them. And someone asked him, 2025 is coming. The world seems to be in such a catastrophic state. Where's the hope? What is hope? And I like what he said, because this refers to what you're talking about, Black Pill. He talks about hope, and he says, hope is optimism with a broken heart. This means that hope has an earned understanding of the sorrowful or corrupted nature of things, yet it rises to attend to the world even still. And that's sort of my view, where we're looking at how bad things are and corrupted and black-pilled, but yet we still rise to attend the world, to attend to our daily needs and find joy and happiness. And so, yes, I like saying we should rise to attend the world. Even still, don't get depressed and locked into your caves or homes. And I guess maybe one more question for you, just on podcasting itself. It's not easy. It's difficult. I think you and I are in similar boats, and we need all the ammunition that we can get, the support that we can get. But just, do you have any thought on just the podcasting space? There's a lot of people doing a lot of great people that I think you and I collaborate with, and just thoughts on the podcasting itself.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great forum. I think it is a really great opportunity to potentially be a bulwark against collectivist ideology. Some of my concerns is that I love that people now in the independent are kind of taking a cue from the not so independent, and they're doing a lot of cross promotion and collaborating and cross pollinating. I think that's great, but what I would caution people in that regard is that we don't want a bunch of just opposite polarity, right? Like, we don't really want like just a bunch of collective that are just alternative to the mainstream. So I would encourage people to absolutely collaborate, but still focus on the things that your passions drive you to, the things that your interests, your talents, your skills, and to try so that we can have more diversity in the space, because the more collectivism that we get, the easier it is to co-opt and steer things, and also to create these kind of hegemonic kind of Hegelian battles that can be synthesized. So I think that that's something I'm just seeing a lot more of, this kind of these collaborations. It's great. I think people should collaborate with each other, and we should be supportive of each other, but not at the cost of, the things that I research are not the things that are interesting to everybody else. And so, that's great. Then that's something I can bring, and then we can converse. And then I love when I, collaborate with other researchers who have other things to fill in the gaps. And so that's, but yeah, I don't know if any of that kind of makes sense, but I do think that it is a great opportunity to present ideas and to have genuine, organic kind of outgrowths and discussions from those ideas, both for the podcasters. It's kind of like having individual, not like really grassroots kind of think tanks in a way, but then also for the audiences who are listening, because it's kind of like they get to be flies on the wall for conversations that are would normally be happening behind closed doors. And so I think that's the beauty of podcasts, and I think that's one of the real gifts of this medium, is that it does invite people into that conversation. And oftentimes it's the people listening who make the most impact, because they're the ones with the boots on the ground. They learn things from the discussion that they can execute in day-to-day life, whether that's at their school board meetings, or whether it's, just in how they decide to raise their children, maybe homeschooling or some other format that they wouldn't have necessarily thought about previously prior to hearing a specific conversation, or how they decide to source their food, or whatever it may be. But I'm just trying to give tangible, practical application. This is how people take the information into their day-to-day life, and I think that's the biggest value. It's really that ripple effect. So yeah, I think that's the only. So those are kind of like the pluses and the minuses that I'm seeing in the space, and yeah, but overall, and it is really hard for independent people who are truly independent, as you said. So I would just encourage the audience, like, if you value the information, and you don't want it to be controlled, then it really is up to you to support the people you listen to, the people whose work you respect, and the people whose work you feel has contributed in some way to your life. Then, to pay that forward and support them so that they can continue. Because either they continue by being controlled, or they continued by your support. So we would prefer your support.
Controlled by our paid subscribers. No, and I agree with what you said earlier. I don't like to be affiliated. I like to just be by myself. I'm
Mhm.
part of the Independent Media Alliance, but I view that as I am very loosely affiliated
Right.
because like I don't like to be any part of any formal group. I am just on my own. I'm not
Sure.
left or right. I'm not part of
Yeah.
any organization. I'll collaborate with others, as you say. I do the
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance with Monica and Mike once a month. Loosely
They're great.
affiliated.
I love them both. So
Yeah, with IMA and stuff like that. But as you say, we have to be careful because we don't know who is who, what's going on. Again, what I mentioned earlier, there are these very long term, there are these near term plans, but then there are these very insidious long term plans because it's very difficult to deceive the people who are really discerning, I think, like us. And it's kind of like whether it was the Gnosticism or this or that, North American Union, it's kind of like we see that all, guys. And it's very difficult to deceive some of us. And so all of your links are in the description. Tell us again where the best place is to find you, to support you, and all that.
So CourtneyTurner.com is probably the best place to find all my stuff. And just for those who are listening, I do spell my name a little bit differently. It's spelled like Courtenay. It's pronounced Courtney, but it's CourtenayTurner.com. And all my social media, all my various podcast platforms are there. And I am starting to kind of switch up my format for Substack, where most of it will be the premium content. So if you are so inclined and want to become a paid subscriber over there, that would be awesome.
Well, follow Courtney on all her channels. And thank you, Mrs. Turner. Now you are a Mrs.
Yeah. Thank you.